Thank you so much. And thank you, Lynn, and all of our gracious hosts for having me today. And thank you to Debbie Dooley, my baby sister, who is the greatest, most important, clearest messenger that we have for energy liberty in America. And the difference that she's made is remarkable. So thank you, Debbie, for all that you do. Yeah. Georgia, that stuff doesn't happen without Debbie making noise. I usually talk to conservative audiences, and I'm not guessing about your politics, but I'm usually talking to conservatives, but occasionally I get the pleasure of being invited to address an environmental group or trade associations and new energy companies about how to talk with conservatives, how to bring conservatives into broader coalitions. And we always, I don't know if you feel like this, but I always feel like a little bit like a critically endangered zoo animal that is exhibited for some, perhaps lunch entertainment. And then you guys can spend some time feeling for, a horn and tail, making sure that that we're real. We are real, and I think that we can say too that energy liberty advocates, right-wing environmentalists, free market climate advocates, whatever you want to call us, we are growing in numbers in the wild, which is terrific.
The other side's going to be in danger by the time.
That sounds like a threat. So let me tell you a little bit about Republic N, which is the community that I'm affiliated with, why we exist, and then I'll give you a couple data points on what we're seeing change around America in terms of conservatives engaging in clean energy and environmental problems, and then a little gentle advice on engaging with my kinfolk and how you might go about doing that without committing some of the heresies that a lot of environmental and new energy groups seem to commit. And then, who knows, but I'll try to wrap it up in 10 minutes because, can I just see a show of hands? After Debbie talked, who's already burning with a question that they want to ask? All right, so I can just keep talking. Okay.
Good question.
Okay, super. All right, well, we got one then that we're working towards. Republic N is a community of eco-right, free market conservatives. We are grassroots conservatives from around the country, and we have clusters in hubs in Miami and Chicago. But we are free market conservatives that are looking to apply free market principles to climate change and environmental problems and to deploy clean energy and ensure energy liberty. There has been a generation or so of malaise in the application of free market principles to environmental problems. We're hoping to fix that. And the reason that we're needed, that we are niche in the world, is that there isn't a home for eco-right conservatives. There is a bunch of homes for the environmental left, and the environmental left has had hegemony over environmental issues and clean energy for like a generation, and that has presented problems. Because when the environmental left constructs all the narratives around climate change or clean energy, then that is what the typical American voter is primed to think of as soon as they hear the words climate change or clean energy or solar energy. And the result has been, when you hear climate change or solar, you think about Al Gore and the environmental left, and you think of big government regulations, and you think of these problems as presented as a pretense for regulatory action that limits your liberty because some liberal who's smarter than you knows what you should be driving or installing in your house or putting on your roof or doing, whatever at your home, and that feels like a infringement on liberty. So we've built this narrative that as soon as you say climate change, you think less liberty. As soon as you say clean energy, you think big government regulations. You big subsidies and government spending and picking winners and losers. I mean, you can hear all these dog whistle words over and over again, and they're built into the clean energy narrative. They're built into the climate change narrative, and a big part of the reason for that is because the left has fully dominated this issue for a long time, and not forever. I mean, we were just hearing about your Republican governor who signed one of the most aggressive RPSs in the country. Actually, I've never met Tim Pawlenty. I'm a big fan of Tim Pawlenty. I did see him a couple times on an airplane, and one time I had the guts to kneel next to him. And now that he's in, Financial Service Roundtable, he can fly first class, right? He doesn't have to fly coach like all the politicians. So I kneeled there next to Tim Pawlenty, and I was going to ask him about climate change, like when are you going to come back to yourself on climate change, or congratulate him on clean energy. Instead, all I could say is, go Pack, go. And I know you guys we're in a pretty close fight this year. I'm from Wisconsin originally. I have a Packers tie that my dad convinced me not to wear. He thought that would be overly aggressive. I'm like, I'm already a conservative environmentalist, Dad. I'm used to making people mad. And I imagine that this is really frustrating for you guys, for people in this room. Raise your hand if you're in the private sector. Wow. It just must be really frustrating to be tethered to a narrative that has been so screwed up by the environmental left. It must be frustrating to know that, like, super majorities of the American public are with you and are with your, ability to exercise freedom and competition and compete with the utilities and deliver clean air and clean energy to the American people, without government intervention, or with at least just the government leveling the playing field with the incumbent fuels and the incumbent parastatals. And that must feel very fair and normal and ordinary to you, and it must be really frustrating to have a narrative kind of usurped by what people perceive to be hidden political agendas. Raise your hand again if that is true, and you were frustrated by the politics around your industry. Hey, then all the hands went up, and I wonder if that's in part because Minnesota is not as terrible as Wisconsin for solar. That's a video camera, right? But I believe that Governor Walker will correct this injustice. Okay. Things are changing. And that is really good news. And this, it takes a while in America to reach tipping points and things. And my boss, Bob Inglis, likes to say that in America, more than anywhere else in the world, we go from the impossible to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. And we do that a lot. And that happens when there's external events that force or put things. But one of the things that helps pass from the impossible to the inevitable without going to the probable is when the entire country is unified around something. Obviously, that's not always the case. And clean energy is the closest thing we have for an issue that the whole country is unified around. Not specific policies, but the acceleration of clean energy development in general. And this is why, as a climate change, we decided to reform conservatism by picking the easiest issue available, which was climate change. But perhaps even easier is clean energy, and that's why I'm so excited to see all the success that Debbie's having, and why we're starting to get a little more vocal in energy liberty fights, because it's a more intuitive way to change the point from let's support this energy versus this energy versus this one, to what everyone in this room believes and what is true, and a very powerful message for conservatives and Americans alike: more liberty means cleaner air. More liberty means cleaner air, and that's, okay, we all know that. I know that sounded like it was an applause line, like I was waiting for it, but it would have been at a conservative gathering. There's a great poll out. You guys should download. I won't go through all the details about it. From the Clear Path Foundation. Just last month, it was commissioned from 3 different top first-class Republican pollsters, and they found some remarkable results. For one, 84% of the country, including 72% of Republicans, support the acceleration of clean energy development. But those numbers go way up when you give reasons. So supporting the acceleration of clean energy development to reduce dependence on foreign oil, which is sort of a false argument, but still gets 79% of Republicans. You go up to 77% of Republicans when you focus on jobs, and 80% of Republicans and 91% of the public support accelerating clean energy development. 80% of Republicans to reduce pollution and clean up the air. That's the number one of all those issues polled that brings conservatives to the table, and that includes 68% of conservative Republicans, self-identified. Also, my issue, or what I work on the most, climate change, we don't have as great of figures when you look at a candidate A versus a candidate B thing. And candidate A is the prototypical, like Obama Democrat. He says climate change is a problem. We need to strengthen EPA and up our subsidies for clean energy. Versus a candidate B who says different statements. Okay, candidate A, the EPA subsidy person, wins with Republicans and Democrats if candidate B is a climate hoaxer. They win if candidate B diminishes the problem of climate change. Candidate B kicks the butt out of the EPA and subsidy candidate A if the message is, regardless of climate change, we need to accelerate the clean energy to clean up our air and reduce dependence on foreign oil. Candidate B wins if you say climate change is real and we have free market options to deal with it, or we should look at free market alternatives. Candidate B wins if you say climate change is real, but regardless of how much humans influence it, we need to minimize the risk of climate by accelerating clean energy. That gets 76% of Republicans. So whatever this I know we heard. We'll take questions from anyone except the CNBC moderator, because what they said in that debate. I mean, I'm happy we got 4 climate questions in the 2 debates, but they hedged every question like, you're out of league with the rest of your party because you said climate change is real. Or what was the question of attacking? Like, you differ from the rest of you. They asked 5 of them so far. They've all had climate realist answers. 76% of the party thinks that Republicans should do something about climate change. That includes 85% of Republicans under 35, including 62% of Republicans under 35 who support the president's Clean Power Plan because there's nothing else on the table. Like, this is not a monolithic hoax or dilemma on the right. It is a small fringe, and the rest of the conservatism is ready to work on solutions. And thankfully, we have gracious folks in the solar energy industry and other industries that are willing to broaden the coalition and look to be more inclusive in our policy moving forward, and that's really terrific. The other part from that poll I wanted to mention is 89% of Americans and 87% of Republicans supported net metering, and 85 and 85 for third-party leasing and third-party financing. Which, I mean, you can't even get any higher than that in polls. There are higher numbers of self-identified Republicans and Democrats that believe lizard people are running this country than are against net metering or accelerating clean energy development. For real, check out the public policy poll in PPP. 15% of the country thinks lizard people are running. So the last thing I want to mention, and then we'll have 15 or 10 or so minutes for questions, is how do we go about broadening the conversation, involving conservatives more in the coalition that you guys are assembling? And pardon me too for not knowing very much about Minnesota. So it's strange to be invited to entertain a lunch when you might be the least qualified person in the room to talk about what the conference is convened over. But I guess that's how badly you need conservatives. Firstly, energy liberty is an outstanding firm. So that's why we're just so excited about the success Debbie's having. I would encourage all of you to look to Debbie as a resource for how to message on some of these typical utility fights that are happening across the country. And they all take different forms, but they all seem to follow a few different patterns, and one of them is like, oh, we're for free market, we're for competition, we're for competition. Holy shit, 0.5% of our state's electricity is coming from solar. That sounds like a big threat to me, and then jump into action to shut down whatever it is that's promoting the solar. In this state, you have the community solar gardens, and In Florida, they slow down solar with an intangible property tax and the limitations on metering. In Wisconsin, they cap everything. So there's a lot of different avenues for utilities to fight back, and they're all very convoluted and hard to understand. Energy liberty is easy to understand. So I think it's a powerful message frame. More liberty means cleaner air. When you let people decide where to get their own energy, they don't go in their backyard and buy a diesel genset or build a mini little coal plant. When you give people liberty, they should go clean. Second on the framing, so energy liberty is good. Now you gotta go to conservatives with credible messengers and affirm their truth, which means people like Debbie are really important. Because it's impossible to not come off condescending if you go to, or holier than thou, if you are part of an environmental group and you do like outreach to conservatives. It's so funny, we see each other being talked about as the other, we're not even in the room all the time. Like, what can we do to get conservatives to think this is a good idea, or how do we fool conservatives into this? And then I get asked to come do talks sometimes, not this one's free, that are like, teach us how to talk to conservatives. You know how hard that is to give that presentation and not sound like a condescending, egomaniacal, holier than thou swear word? It really is hard. So credible message is very important, and everyone that raised their hand before, as a private sector, that's tremendously powerful among conservatives. It's real world business experience. You're not preaching because you think something, we should give money to this instead of that. You're not preaching what people should put in or out of their house. You're just asking for the right to compete fairly in an open market, and conservatives get that. And the thing about framing I want to mention is, this is kind of nerdy. Okay, so there's this book from the 80s called The Cultural Theory of Risk. Aaron Wildowski and Mary Douglas. Anyone familiar with this? Great. Then I didn't need to introduce it. I could have just passed it off as mine. So what Wildowski points out, and has the data to back it up, is we tend as a people to colonize risks, to get really worried about risks that we can attribute to the actions of immoral actors. Okay, so let's think about that for a second. That means, if you hate capitalism and you think big oil is evil and you think that greedy capitalists are destroying the planet, it's really easy to see climate change as an existential threat. Because these guys that are responsible for it are villains in your book. It makes sense to you that they're villains. So it makes sense to you that they can be responsible for this environmental calamity. What if you think big oil creates jobs and natural gas, and you're pumped to see natural gas bringing down emissions nationwide? And what if you think capitalism is the greatest engine of prosperity that the world has ever known? And what if you think that those greedy capitalists are job creators? Then how are you to attribute one of the bigger environmental calamities in history to those moral actors in your group? It's more difficult. What I think you can all see on the right from time to time is that we have a much easier time blaming the government for stuff. And you can, many of these issues that we're dealing with, it's not capitalism, big business, big oil that's throwing up the roadblocks. It's government. And it's government unfairly treating certain industries vis-a-vis other industries. It's government allowing the perpetual and egregious free riding from the biggest companies in America and passing those costs on to smaller companies and consumers. The line Debbie used is, I think everyone should memorize it. They're socializing their soot and privatizing their profit, right? And as a true free market conservative, you privatize your soot and you privatize your profit. So I think that we can do a better job framing some of these obstacles to solar, not as these capitalists taking advantage of us, but as government. And when you have a vertically integrated parastatal monopolist, it's not that far of a stretch to discuss them in the context of government putting up roadblocks instead of the private sector.